Wanna talk? So let's talk. Yeah. Talk. You wanna talk? You gotta talk, you need to talk. News talk.
I talk, you talk to Solomon. I talk, you talk to Solomon. Yeah, let's talk to Solomon. Talk to Solomon.
You gotta talk, you wanna.
This is the last section of the Talk to Solomon show tonight. Dr. Alan Keyes is our guest. Greg Howard is our financial expert. Police Chief Steve Davis, former Police Chief Steve Davis, is our co-host. And I'm Stan Solomon. I have a couple of topics I want to cover. Let me just announce them. One is what's happening in America under Obama is a marked decline in marriage, a marked decline in abortion, a marked increase in government control, and we have things like Obamacare that are now running into maybe some speed bumps and maybe not. So I'm going to start with Obamacare. 16 states already, and more states possibly, to potentially as many as 30 states, but certainly more likely than not 20 states, are saying they're not going to form the insurance exchanges, which under the law have to be done by the states. Unless the House Republicans capitulate, they can't change the law, and they don't have the authority to issue regulations mandating that states form these insurance exchanges. So I'm going to start with you, Greg, because it's your area of expertise. What do you see happening?
Well, first of all, I'm proud of my particular state of Alabama. We passed a state constitutional amendment that makes it illegal to force anybody to buy a product of any kind, especially relating to insurance. That is now part of our state constitution. So the stage is set there for an interesting battle should the federal government decide to force it upon us. Now, the problem arises as more and more states raise their hands and say, we're not going to put together this state pool for you. The problem now becomes interesting for the financial cronies and the insurance companies that helped Obama and his folks put this together. Remember, this was put together by a bunch of special interests. It is going to benefit a handful of insurance companies, and I have to be careful here because as a member of the insurance profession, I have to be careful about naming any particular companies or I might lose my license. But these companies came together for a seat at the table. This is known as corporate fascism. And they are going to benefit greatly from this if it takes off. The problem is these pools will not be ready by October as they're supposed to be. So we're going to have that issue. People are going to be fined for not buying a product that isn't available. And as a result, we're going to see a great deal more problem stepping up to the plate. So this is going to be a tremendous challenge to even get this going. Now, add to the problem that the Supreme Court is now taking another look at Obamacare, thanks to some of the issues raised by Liberty University. Again, faith stepping forward to do what needs to be done. Incidentally, Alan, back on your topic about the Tea Parties, I had followed you for years, talked to you several times on talk shows, and it was in Montgomery 3 years ago on Tea Party Tax Day that I finally got to shake your hand. So I'm grateful that you were part of the Tea Party movement and came to Montgomery that day. So thank you very much for that. So anyway, here's the problem. They're not going to be able to implement it. They're not going to have the broad support they need, and they will not have the state pools ready in time. And I think as more and more states step forward and say, we're not going to do it, people are going to become more and more emboldened and step up and say, not in our state either. Remember, 55% of people still oppose this, regardless of what the presidential election results were.
Chief?
Well, Indiana, the Governor-elect Mike Pence has stated he's not going to start this exchange in Indiana, which is good news. We won't have a really veto-proof House and Senate in Indiana until January 1. But once that happens, we might also amend the state constitution. That's possible as well. But for right now, Mike Pence, the governor-elect, said he's not going to start this exchange, which is good news for Indiana and good news for the United States, because Obamacare is really terrible legislation that's all about control and taxing people that don't need to be taxed anymore. So anything we can do to stop this, I'm all for it.
Dr. Keys.
Well, I think the one dimension of this I'm scratching my head over it, Stan, now, is because I think that the idea that the states are getting up and finally beginning to reassert the truth that, according to the scheme that is in our actual Constitution, it is the business of the state governments to defend the liberties of the people against encroachments by a federal government that is going beyond its boundaries. They do have a responsibility to become the focal points for people to constitutionally say no to these efforts by the federal government to expand its legislative tyranny over our people. But in this particular case, what is going to be the practical result of all of this? My bet is that this is one of those controversies that has these people I think of as the elitist wolves in sheep's clothing sitting there chuckling to themselves and saying, good, good, keep it up. And then we're going to step in at just the right moment and make it clear, okay, we give up. The state governments can't have a role in this, so we're going to force everybody to be part of a pool that's going to be then created and administered by the national government. You watch. It's jujitsu, see? And it seems to me that part of the difficulty here, and the Boehner Republicans are exactly the people who are putting us in this position, is that we should not be opposing Obamacare piecemeal. We should not be saying this part of it's bad and that part of it's bad and so forth and so on. We should simply say this is rotten in principle. Get out of our face with it altogether. We're not going to let it stand. And they refused to say that. All of them. Boehner refused to say it. Romney refused to say it. All these phony Republicans, because they're not interested in stopping it. Some of the huge corporate interests have a stake in getting out from under the notion that it is for private enterprise and the private sector to work out the terms on which people will have, by and large, their access to health insurance. That's how the system has worked. But that meant that on a sector-by-sector basis, even on a business-by-business basis, you had to sit down and work it out with your employees, which meant dealing with the unions, dealing with this, dealing with that. The whole idea that you're going to turn this over to the government, do you know what it's about? It's about getting the corporate powers off the hook for it. Putting people in a position where if they're unhappy with the health insurance and the health coverage and so forth and so on, they can no longer complain about it at the bargaining table. They can no longer work it out in their contracts. They can no longer deal with it in the workplace, because the best they're going to be able to do is write a letter to their congressman. And we see how much good that does. And that's exactly where they want us. They want us in a position where instead of having some clout as individuals, as employees, as unionized people, as highly skilled workers of this and that kind, so that we can make things work in a way that reflects our own self-reliance and the contributions we can make and the rewards we ought to be getting out of the work that we do. No, it's going to become a question of whether or not, as a solitary little individual, you're going to be able to take on the power of the government, which will then become the one that works out the terms on which people are going to have access to health insurance. I don't understand why people haven't seen through this. How come union workers don't see through this? All the folks who have, in fact, were among the 90% who were doing okay, thank you, before they started this ruination of the health sector. Don't they realize that the whole thing was started simply in order to put individuals in this hopeless confrontation with a government that is now going to control, eventually, the whole business of the terms on which people have access to health care? And the only way that you'll have any clout in that is if you're a billionaire. See?
Amazing, and yet sadly true. Now, I'd like to talk about the fact that abortions have gone down, possibly because of certain things that are given to people, morning after pills, which they don't call an abortion, and marriage has gone down. Marriage going down is bad news. Abortion going down is good news if, in fact, abortion is going down. Steve, I'll start with you.
Well, first of all, if the morning after pill is the reason for this, it's still an abortion. It's just not reported as an abortion in an abortion clinic. But I do believe that as the more and more we talk about abortion, which everyone, the GOP, conservatives, everyone should talk more about it. We saw that some of the conversation was muddled in the last debates. But the more we talk about abortion and murdering babies, we should talk about murdering babies, not abortion, the better we'll get at it. And the better we get at it, the more and more people will realize, hey, we're murdering babies, and it's really the wrong thing to do. So, but the marriage rate, I believe that's two things. First of all, it's very stressful today. People want to be able to provide for their families, and so it's very stressful to think, well, I might get into a marriage and I won't be able to provide with a job and with money for my family. And used to be, it wasn't too long ago when you've had one child or 12 children, it really wasn't that much of a monetary difference. A little bit more food, but not really the expenses we have today with education and all of that. So I think the economic situation today has really put a hamper on marriage. And also, the last little caveat here is, Obama and their regime, they've really tried to downplay marriage. They talk about it as a bad thing. They promoted the homosexual lifestyle and other lifestyles that are promoted and put a downplay on this. And since our children are now subject to all of their information coming from, if it's not at home or in church, they get all their information from school and from the entertainment business and from the news media, all controlled by the liberal media. All of the young people today have been indoctrinated into the leftist way of thinking. So I think that's what's happened to the marriage issue here. But the abortion issue, I think, are two things: morning after pill, and also the more we talk about it, the more we talk about murdering babies, the more we do that, it's really made a difference in people's decisions.
Greg?
No, I wouldn't be surprised that marriage is going down in a society that Steve raised one good point. Marriage is something that people tend to do when they're feeling economically secure and so forth, but it's also not surprising in a society that has, for many years now, constantly downplayed anything Christian in value. It is a society that has glorified people living together without the benefit of marriage, or as I call it, bluntly, living in sin. They put it on TV as if it's some sort of good thing. You see Hollywood actors having babies and then getting married. This is a great example for our children. You see constant reminders that somehow Christian beliefs are somehow out of the mainstream. Well, I promise you, they're not out of the mainstream to God. They're not out of the mainstream for my family. And this is what we teach in our house, and this is what our friends teach to their children. This is what my church teaches to the children and teenagers in our church. But if we don't fight back against this in our own way, and each person is responsible for this. If you're listening to this show and you don't have your family in church, if you're not having a Bible study of some type with your children, if you're not counseling your children early and often against what the values that are being shown to them on TV, don't be surprised if your son or daughter is moving in with people repeatedly instead of getting married. You're going to get whatever you teach your children to be, and you're going to have to work hard to counter the societal influences that make this all evil behavior. I'm going to say evil. Evil means contrary to the will of God. If you're going to take all this evil behavior that's modeled around them, and if you're not going to contradict it as a parent, do not be surprised to see it show up in your family life. As far as abortions going down, it may very well be an issue with the morning after pill, but it also may be a hopeful sign. We'll have to see if the birth rates are going up, likewise, and birth rates as opposed by population, not by simple raw numbers. But we'll have to see if maybe, just maybe, some of our good efforts, the billboards about counseling for pregnant mothers, the alternatives to abortion, the adoption that so many of us are working for, the pro-life efforts that Alan and I have worked hard for in his way and my way, maybe they're not having some effect. But we'll have to see if there's a corresponding rise in birth rates to go with this drop in abortion. The study is incomplete. It doesn't give us enough information to know for sure.
Dr. Keys.
Well, Stan, what's the unemployment rate, do you think, right now?
The employment rate? You mean what the government's reporting or in reality?
Yeah.
Well, the
22%.
government's reporting around 8%.
That's the point I was about to make. You just did it perfectly. So why should I believe the numbers they're reporting? Let's see. If you're going to get accurate numbers on abortion, you have to depend, first of all, for those accurate numbers, on reporting by the abortion clinics, right?
Certainly.
I mean, how else are you going to keep track of abortions? And do you believe that these people, I mean, because I know for a fact, Human Life International, that they actually do abortions that they don't publicize, because if they did, they would then have to in various ways admit that they have been facilitating the sexual assault and rape statutorily of minors, right? So they cover certain things, certain aspects of this whole abortion industry are covered up. I don't know whether any such figures are going to be reliable. Coming out of an industry that has a stake and a motive in various ways, going to a government that is now in the hands of people who would love to make the point that if you promote abortion, you'll reduce abortion, which is an interesting kind of paradox that I'm not sure I'm ready to accept, just because they say these numbers show this and that, and I'm not even sure anymore that we can trust any numbers we're seeing out there, because all of it depends on the integrity with which people report and keep track of certain phenomenon. And in this particular case, the phenomenon of abortion, the people reporting the abortions and the people keeping track of them have these weird motives going on to support their lying understanding of the present situation. And finally, the point that was just made was one I just wanted to reiterate. Why is it that we immediately go to the morning after pill and so forth? If, let us say, there is a drop in abortion, might it not correlate with the fact that we have also been seeing an increase in pro-life sentiment in this society? Of course, we wouldn't want folks to stand up and say, golly, those pro-lifers are getting the job done. And I'm not sure I would encourage them to reach that happy conclusion based on these numbers. But on the other hand, if you're going to try to explain the phenomena, why not take a look at the possibility that, contrary to the lies being told, the actual open, sneering face of evil that we've seen through and in this whole Obama phenomenon has actually awakened more people to the heart of evil that is involved in this whole abortion industry and all its advocates and all its works. That's possible, don't you think? So I don't know exactly what conclusion to reach, because you're talking about a reports that I don't consider reliable, and they're coming through and being filtered through a media that certainly wants to bias our understanding of what they mean, so that we won't suggest that maybe people in this country are finally beginning to understand the evil that's at work in this whole abortion lie. But we'll see, because I think that the latter is actually going on. And it's one of the reasons the Republicans didn't want to nominate somebody for president who actually was pro-life, right? So we got this phenomenon where somebody who's out there saying, I'm pro-life, I'm adamantly, severely, this and that and the other thing, then runs commercials telling everybody what a positive, good abortion is in this instance, in that instance, in the other instance. You know, I don't know. My little trick that I do, where I put slavery in place of abortion when certain things happen, and Alan is sitting there saying to himself, now wait a minute. If I were to watch a commercial that started saying, I'm adamantly, severely opposed to slavery, but I think that in this case, in that case, in the other case, it's really a positive good. Would I really accept that the person selling themselves in this way was pro-life? I sure wouldn't. So why would you have a party put up somebody like this? Because they're afraid of the political force and power of the pro-life sentiment that is growing in this country. And they wouldn't actually have wanted a demonstration of it. And that's why they're trying to knock the whole idea of a new party based on a true and real commitment to the God-acknowledging principles of this country. They don't want people to come together in a way that demonstrates the true power of that before they have completely consolidated the elitist tyranny that they are putting in place to take the place of our Constitution.
All right, we only have a few minutes left, so I'm going to try and plan ahead here. Greg, a final thought, please.
Well, I'm looking at an article in the National Review that says pregnancies also fell during the time period of that study. And it was also in that year, according to Gallup, was the first year that a majority of Americans described themselves as pro-life. So that bears the sentiments of Alan and I on that subject. So I'll defer the rest of the conversation to the rest of you.
All right, Steve.
I want to go back to something Dr. Key said earlier. I won't say it the exact same way, but it was a great comment. And we have to decide whether we're going to just be part of the world that has turned their back on God, or we're going to remain the shining example, the exception to the rule, and be the United States of America, the shining example that has God on their side. Because without God and Christianity, we're not going to make it.
All right, I'll comment next. We'll let Alan close it. I believe that we are in very troubling times, and I believe that we will see in the coming year, 2013, a breakdown. I think we're going to see maybe not a civil war, but close. We're going to see a dramatic acknowledgement of what's already happening, and that is a group of people in this country, primarily have-nots, but not all have-nots, who have decided enough is enough, that it is time for them to have, and they're going to take it. Obama's not going to give it to them fast enough. Rhinos aren't going to give it to them fast enough. We're going to see illegals. We're going to see have-nots just break down and start to take. We're going to see rapes and robberies and murders beyond the capacity of police to impact. And I believe that we should prepare for that. I think to not do so is to be irresponsible. Alan, I'll let you finish it up.
Well, while we, I think, have to take some realistic account of the things that might materialize that correspond to our fears, Stan, I guess I feel that the immediate challenge for people who still love and believe in what this country is supposed to be is the other side of it. Because I think that the people who founded the country did not by accident put as the first goal of our Constitution in order to form a more perfect union. See? I think that whatever the cause of it, the breakup of the United States of America will be a tragedy of world historical proportions that will be the harbinger of a nightmare century for the people of the world. And I think that as we are still in a position to avoid it, the people who actually represent that union, and it's not a union of states, and it's not a union of politics and governments and all the stuff people talk about. They wanted to form a more perfect union. Have we ever asked, before the government of the United States existed, they weren't talking about, when they talked about the imperfect union, it wasn't the states they were talking about, because that was the problem. The union was the union of the people, and what that union, the way in which that union proved itself was during the Revolution. And people came together and vindicated the assertion of America's independence. So what was the ground for union? The ground for union was what was stated there in the Declaration. That's what the founders said themselves repeatedly in their letters, in their correspondence, in their speeches, even on their deathbeds. They made it clear. Those principles represented the union of the American people. And the aim was to perfect it by showing that those principles which gave respect to people's rights, which gave respect to the capacity of people for self-government, would be perfected in a government that would produce order and decency and prosperity. And that's exactly what happened, by the way. It didn't just happen, no, because order dropped on us out of the sky and a wonderful government. No, people fought for it, and they died for it, and they suffered for it, and they went through all kinds of hardship for it. Over the course of decades and 2 centuries, they did. And now, the people who benefited from the enormous strength and spiritual strength that led to the conditions that then produced our prosperity after we had stood against evil in the world time and again in the course of the 20th century, we have become corrupted and soft, we think, and we're going to let it all go. Why is this so, Stan? Why do we think this? We think it because we've forgotten who we are. We are not a people of government. We are not a people of unlicensed freedom. We came together on a union that was based on the simple premise that God rules, that it is His justice that we are called to respect, and that if we respect it in our laws and in our habits and in our willingness to take responsibility for who we are, that our society will prosper in liberty, as no society could ever prosper under any kind of tyranny at all. Now, it's been proven, and all we have to do is have faith in that proof. And that's what I think is the challenge of the future. I'm not going to sit around worrying about whether these people or those people or the other people are going to start walking outside the boundaries of decent behavior. If we don't know what to do with that, we really are far gone. But I am going to worry about whether people of good heart who profess a faith in God are going to get rid of their shame, are going to stop being ashamed of the gospel and the name of Jesus Christ and the scriptures and the willingness to invoke them and rely upon them, but will stand boldly forward in order to think through our challenges in a way that reflects the logic of that acknowledgement and fear of God and no one else that was characteristic of our founding and of our country at its best. That's what I think we need, Stan. And I'm more preoccupied with how we then embrace and exemplify that trust in God, that love of God, that fear of nobody but God. Because if we do, then just as people were able to do it in the course of opening up the frontier and staring down the evil of slavery and enduring the horrors of war that helped us to defeat the evils of the 20th century, we'll do it again. But without God and without that return to that simple trust in Him that then emboldens and encourages people to stand up for right and therefore to exercise their rights, I don't think we'll succeed. So I'm looking for a positive revival, Stan. I don't think we're going to revive on account of our fears. I think we're going to revive on account of our true love. And the true love of the decent folks responsible for the real success of America was not the love of money, nor the love of liberty, nor the love of themselves even. It was the love of God, through which came the true love they showed for all those other things. And if we can just get the people who believe that, and I know they're there by the millions upon millions, to stop being ashamed of it. Let go of the shamed Republicans. They hate your talking about this, and I know, because I've done it for years, and I know how they balk at anybody who's willing to say what I just said. I won't have anything to do with them anymore. And I don't think anybody who really cares to revive that sense of real trust in God should have anything to do with them anymore. We need to think anew and act anew, as Lincoln said, to disenthrall ourselves so we can save our country.
Well, on that note, we'll call it a good night. Thank you, Dr. Keyes. Thank you, Greg. Thank you, Chief Steve. And thank you, America, for listening and watching Talk to Solomon. Good night.
Good night.